The German officers standing inside the ruined railway station near Prim believed the Americans were already collapsing. On the night of December 17, 1944, maps were spread across wooden tables under weak lantern light, while exhausted staff officers traced arrows west toward the Meuse River. Outside, the engines of Panther tanks and Tiger IIs echoed through the freezing darkness of the Ardennes forest. Snow clung to steel armor. Tracks crushed frozen mud into deep black scars across the roads. The offensive had begun only one day earlier, and already many German commanders felt something dangerous returning to life. Confidence. After months of retreat, they finally believed they were pushing the Allies backward again.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
Veteran tank crews joked that the Americans could not stop a determined armored thrust once German heavy tanks reached open ground. Most believed American anti-tank guns were weak, short-ranged, and poorly coordinated. They expected resistance. They did not expect death arriving from nearly 2 miles away. Far ahead of them, hidden beyond a ridgeline near Bastogne, American tank destroyer crews waited in silence. Frost covered helmets and gloves. Breath drifted through the open fighting compartments of their M36 Jackson tank destroyers. Unlike the fully enclosed German Panthers, these vehicles left crews exposed to snow, wind, and artillery fragments. But the Americans possessed something German commanders underestimated. The powerful 90 memory gun mounted on the M36 could punch through German armor at terrifying distances when handled by experienced crews. Many German tankers still believed range protected them. In a few hours, that belief would vanish in fire. The Ardennes offensive, later called the Battle of the Bulge, was Hitler's desperate gamble to split Allied forces in Western Europe. The plan depended on speed. German armored columns had to smash through weak American lines, capture key road networks, and drive toward Antwerp before Allied air power and reinforcements could react. Every hour mattered. Every road mattered. That pressure pushed German commanders to move aggressively, even through narrow forest routes buried in ice and snow. At dawn on December 19, thick fog covered the valleys south of Bastogne. Visibility changed every minute. One moment crews could barely see 100 yards. The next moment entire hillsides appeared through gaps in the mist. Oberleutnant Karl Brenner, commanding a Panther platoon from the 2nd Panzer Division, stood halfway out of his turret, scanning the road ahead with binoculars. His unit had advanced steadily for 2 days. Burned American trucks and abandoned equipment lined sections of the road behind them. The offensive seemed unstoppable. Brenner's crews had faced American Shermans before. They knew the strengths and weaknesses of Allied armor. Most German tankers respected American artillery and air power, but tank versus tank combat rarely frightened experienced Panther commanders. The Panther's long-barreled 75 mm KWK-42 gun was deadly accurate at long range. Its frontal armor was extremely difficult for most Allied tanks to penetrate. Brenner believed distance favored him. Several miles away, Captain Raymond Pierce crouched beside an M36 Jackson hidden beneath camouflage netting along a wooded slope overlooking a valley road. Pierce belonged to the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to American defensive forces around Bastogne. His men had barely slept in days. Some crews survived on cold coffee and frozen rations. Their mission was brutally simple: delay the German armor at any cost. Pierce studied the terrain carefully through field glasses. Unlike tanks designed mainly for breakthrough assaults, American tank destroyer doctrine focused on mobility, positioning, and ambush tactics. The M36 Jackson carried a powerful gun but relatively thin armor. If German tanks spotted them first, survival chances dropped fast. That meant American crews relied on concealment, elevation, and range. The freezing wind cut through the open turret, while Corporal Daniel Ruiz adjusted the telescopic sight on the 90mm gun. He was only 22 years old, but months of combat had already aged his face. Ruiz had seen what Panthers could do at close range. He had watched Shermans explode in seconds during previous battles in France. Now he waited with his gloved hand resting against cold steel while snow drifted across the barrel. Then, movement appeared below. Dark shapes emerged through the fog along the valley road, German half-tracks first. Then Panthers. Pierce did not rush. That was the difference between experienced crews and dead crews. He waited for more armor to enter the open ground before giving the order. The German column kept moving confidently through the valley. Engines growled. Tank commanders scanned nearby woods but paid little attention to the distant ridge lines. To them, danger existed closer. Bazooka teams, mines, hidden artillery observers, not American tank destroyers firing from extreme range. Ruiz adjusted the sight again. The lead Panther stopped briefly near a crossroads almost 3,000 yards away. Even for the M36, it was an extremely difficult shot. Inside the turret, Loader Private Ellis Monroe lifted the heavy armor-piercing round into position. The shell alone weighed over 40 pounds. Every movement inside the cramped fighting compartment felt deliberate and exhausting in the freezing air. Target identified, Ruiz whispered. Captain Pierce looked through binoculars one final time. The Panther remained stationary for just a few seconds longer. Fire. The 90mm gun erupted with a violent blast that shook snow from nearby branches. Smoke burst backward from the muzzle brake. Ruiz lost sight of the target for a moment. Far across the valley, the shell slammed into the Panther's frontal armor near the turret ring. The German tank exploded instantly. For several seconds, the entire valley froze in confusion. Brenner stared ahead in disbelief as flames burst from the destroyed Panther. At first he assumed artillery had hit the vehicle, but there had been no incoming barrage, no warning, no nearby firing position. Then another shell arrived. A second Panther lurched sideways as armor fragments sprayed across the road. Now, panic began spreading through the German column. Tank commanders rotated turrets, desperately searching for the attackers. Some scanned nearby forests, while others searched ridge lines through binoculars. But the firing position remained almost invisible through fog and camouflage. Worse still, the distance made it difficult to identify the origin of the shots. German crews were trained to fight at long range, yet many still underestimated how effectively American destroyers could engage from elevated positions. Captain Pierce ordered his crews to shift targets carefully. They were not firing rapidly, they were firing methodically. Each shot mattered. Each shell created confusion. German drivers attempted to maneuver off the road, but the valley terrain worked against them. Soft snow concealed frozen ditches. Several armored vehicles became trapped while trying to reposition. Others blocked the narrow route entirely. Within minutes, the advancing column lost momentum. Brenner finally spotted the faint flash of another American gun far along the ridgeline. Distance? He shouted. The estimate stunned him. Nearly 2 miles. At that range, Brenner knew his own chances of accurate return fire dropped sharply, especially under foggy conditions while moving. Worse, the Americans held the high ground. Every advantage now belonged to the defenders. Another shell crossed the valley. A German half-track erupted in flames. American tank destroyer doctrine suddenly became terrifyingly real. Farther north, additional M36 and M18 Hellcat crews joined the engagement from separate concealed positions. The Americans intentionally spread their destroyers across multiple ridges to create overlapping fields of fire. German crews now faced shells arriving from different angles at enormous range. The battlefield became chaos. Engines roared. Radio operators screamed coordinates into static-filled headsets. Officers tried reorganizing formations already trapped on icy roads under invisible fire. You can almost feel the frustration growing inside the German tanks. These crews were veterans. Many had survived Kursk, Normandy, and countless brutal engagements across Europe. Yet now they faced an enemy they could barely see. The Americans understood something critical about the Ardennes terrain. Snow-covered valleys often created long firing corridors between wooded ridges. A well-positioned tank destroyer with a powerful gun could dominate huge sections of open ground. Captain Pierce exploited that perfectly. At 8:47 a.m., another Panther attempted to climb a slope for better firing position. Ruiz tracked it slowly through the telescopic sight while the tank struggled against icy terrain. On the move, Munro warned. Ruiz waited. The Panther paused briefly while adjusting direction. Fire. The shell crossed the valley in seconds. This time the hit struck the lower front plate. Smoke burst from the hull before flames followed. The crew bailed out into knee-deep snow, some already burning. German return fire finally began reaching the ridgeline moments later. High-velocity 75 mm rounds cracked through trees above the American positions. Snow and branches exploded around the M36s. One shell struck close enough to shower Pierce's crew with dirt and ice fragments. Now the danger changed completely. Long-range ambushes worked best before the enemy identified firing positions. Once German tanks located them, survival depended on movement. Pierce immediately ordered partial relocation. American crews reversed behind tree cover, repositioned several yards away, then fired again from new angles. The mobility of tank destroyers became critical. Unlike fixed anti-tank guns, the M36s could relocate quickly enough to complicate German targeting. Meanwhile, German commanders faced growing disaster farther down the road network. Delays near Bastogne threatened the entire offensive timetable. Fuel shortages already haunted German armored divisions. Every stalled advance burned precious gasoline. Every destroyed vehicle weakened their striking power. Field Marshal Walter Model had warned senior officers before the offensive that the operation depended on rapid movement. Once stalled, German forces would face overwhelming Allied reinforcements and air power. Now delays were spreading. By midday, the fog finally began lifting. That should have helped the Germans. Instead, it made things worse. American artillery observers now identified vehicle concentrations more accurately. Fighter bombers would soon enter the skies once weather improved fully. German crews understood what that meant. The brief protection provided by snowstorms and cloud cover was disappearing. But even before Allied aircraft arrived, the tank destroyers had already inflicted serious damage. One German officer later described the experience as driving into a valley where death came from invisible distances. The psychological effect mattered almost as much as physical losses. German armored doctrine relied heavily on aggressive momentum. Panthers and Tigers performed best when crews controlled engagements with confidence and coordinated movement. But long-range ambushes shattered that rhythm. Suddenly every open road felt dangerous. Every distant ridge might hide another American gun. Near noon, Brenner attempted one final coordinated push through the valley. Surviving Panthers spread into wider formation while infantry advanced cautiously along the woods. German gunners fired suppressive shots toward suspected American positions. For a few minutes, it looked like the attack might regain momentum. Then Captain Pierce's battalion executed another devastating maneuver. Several M18 Hellcats that had remained hidden all morning suddenly opened fire from a separate flank position nearly perpendicular to the German advance. Unlike the heavier M36, the Hellcat emphasized speed above armor. Its 76 mm gun lacked the raw power of the 90 mm. But from side angles against exposed Panthers, it remained deadly. The Germans now faced crossfire. One Panther, attempting to rotate toward the Hellcats, exposed its side armor to Pierce's M36. Ruiz fired instantly. The shell punched through the turret side. The Panther stopped moving. Another German vehicle collided with a disabled half-track while trying to reverse under fire. The narrow road became clogged with wrecks and panicked crews abandoning damaged vehicles. For the Americans, this was exactly the kind of battlefield their tank-destroyer doctrine envisioned years earlier. Enemy armor funneled into predictable routes, concealed destroyers striking from prepared positions, mobility allowing constant repositioning, extreme range fire disrupting attacks before they reached defensive lines. Of course, reality remained brutal on both sides. At 12:26 p.m., German artillery finally bracketed one American ridgeline accurately. Shells crashed through frozen trees with terrifying force. An M36 belonging to Lieutenant Harold Green took a direct hit from artillery fragments that ignited ammunition inside the turret. The explosion killed most of the crew instantly. Burning fuel poured across the snow while nearby destroyers continued firing. No crew on that battlefield felt invincible. Pierce watched medics trying to reach the destroyed vehicle, but forced himself to stay focused on the valley below. More German armor still moved through the roads beyond the smoke. The battle was not over. Then came the moment many survivors remembered most clearly. Shortly after 1:00 p.m., a massive King Tiger from Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 emerged onto elevated ground overlooking sections of the valley. The Tiger II represented one of the most feared armored vehicles of the war. Thick frontal armor. A devastating 88 mm gun. At long range, it could destroy most Allied tanks before they even approached effective firing distance. German crews nearby regained confidence immediately upon seeing it, but Captain Pierce understood something important. The King Tiger still needed line of sight. And line of sight worked both ways. Ruiz carefully adjusted elevation while Monroe loaded another armor-piercing round. The distance stretched near the extreme limits of practical combat engagement. The King Tiger halted briefly while scanning for targets. Pierce gave the order. The M36 fired. The shell crossed the frozen valley. Observers later disagreed about the exact impact location. Some claimed it struck the turret side. Others believed it damaged the lower hull while the Tiger angled slightly during movement. But everyone agreed on what happened next. Smoke burst from the German heavy tank. The vehicle stopped. Then flames emerged from the rear engine compartment. The psychological shock rippled across the battlefield instantly. Even if the King Tiger was not completely destroyed, the fact that American tank destroyers had successfully engaged it at such range shattered remaining confidence among nearby German crews. Momentum died there. By late afternoon, German commanders began redirecting surviving armor onto alternate routes west of Bastogne. The attack had stalled. Delays mounted hour by hour across the Ardennes. American resistance stiffened everywhere. Fuel shortages worsened. Allied reinforcements poured toward critical road junctions. The battle near Bastogne became only one piece of the larger catastrophe slowly unfolding for Germany during the Ardennes offensive. But for many armored crews, it marked a turning point in perception. The Americans were adapting. German tank superiority no longer guaranteed battlefield dominance. Technology, positioning, crew training, communication, and tactical flexibility increasingly shaped armored warfare more than raw armor thickness alone. As darkness approached, snow began falling again across the battlefield. Burned vehicles smoldered beside frozen roads. Abandoned helmets and equipment lay scattered across churned snowfields. Medics searched for wounded men among wrecks still radiating heat into the cold air. Captain Pierce finally climbed down from his destroyer after nearly 12 continuous hours of combat. His ears still rang from repeated gunfire. Ruiz sat silently beside the turret smoking a cigarette with trembling hands, while mechanics checked the gun barrel for wear. None of the American crews celebrated loudly. They knew the war was far from over. German forces remained dangerous. The Ardennes fighting would continue for weeks, with brutal casualties on both sides. Entire towns would be destroyed before the offensive finally collapsed. Yet something important had happened that day. The myth of invulnerable German armor had cracked again. For years, German tank crews often entered battle believing superior range and armor guaranteed dominance against Allied vehicles. Earlier in the war, that confidence frequently proved justified. Panthers and Tigers terrified opposing crews across Europe. But by late 1944, Allied industry, tactics, and battlefield experience had changed the equation dramatically. The M36 Jackson represented that evolution perfectly. Its powerful 90 Minus memory gun gave American crews the ability to challenge even heavy German armor at long range when positioned correctly. Combined with coordinated artillery, reconnaissance, and flexible defensive tactics, American destroyers became far more dangerous than many German commanders expected. In the weeks after the battle, surviving German officers repeatedly reported frustration about long-range American anti-tank fire. Some specifically noted how difficult it had become to identify concealed tank destroyers before taking hits. Others complained about terrain choices forcing armored columns into vulnerable roads overlooked by hidden enemy guns. The battlefield itself was changing faster than old assumptions. Armor alone no longer controlled the fight. By January 1945, the Ardennes offensive had failed completely. German losses in tanks, fuel, vehicles, and experienced crews proved devastating. Many armored units never fully recovered. The final months of the war became a desperate defensive struggle as Allied armies pushed deeper into Germany itself. Years later, surviving veterans from both sides still remembered the terrifying distances involved in some Ardennes engagements. Tank warfare often feels close and personal in movies, but real combat could unfold across enormous spaces where crews sometimes destroyed enemies they barely saw clearly. Weather, elevation, optics, training, and nerve determined survival as much as raw firepower. You can almost picture those frozen valleys now. Engines echoing through snow-covered forests, tank commanders searching distant ridges through binoculars, American destroyer crews waiting silently for the perfect shot while German columns advanced below, believing they still controlled the battlefield. Then the first shell arrives. A tank erupts into flames far ahead. Nobody understands where the shot came from. And suddenly the entire war feels different. Because in those frozen hills near Bastogne, German tankers learned a brutal lesson too late. The Americans were no longer simply surviving German armored attacks. They were hunting them from distances the Nazis never expected possible.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.